Hey everyone, so in this video what I want to talk about is WWDC, and the side of it that I want to actually discuss is with regards to Apple TV, so TvOS. With WWDC 2020, most people's primary focus would have been on the iOS as well as iPadOS side of things. However, for me personally, and obviously having had a quick look through some of the actual detailed information in terms of iOS 14, what I was more concerned with was some of the things relating to Apple TV. So as most of you guys on this channel know, Apple TV is my preferred hardware. Essentially it's my preferred device when it comes to streaming media and consuming media, and obviously it's had a few limitations over the years despite it being the 4K model, and thankfully that's something that Apple has actually addressed in this upcoming version of tvOS 14. Now, I haven't actually installed this, and the reason for that is I have actually trialed betas in the past and with quite catastrophic results. So running betas on your Apple TV isn't the same as running it on a phone or an iPad where you can just reset it, because the 4K Apple TV doesn't actually have any USB port. So I think it was the 3rd gen that used to have a USB-C port, and with that you could basically, if you bricked it, if you updated it onto a beta software and you managed to mess it up, you could just connect it back up to your TV and your computer and reset it and put it back onto a genuine firmware. With the version that I have, and most of you guys will have, we don't have that option anymore. So if it gets bricked, the only option, and by bricked what I mean is if you install a firmware where it has adverse effects, so for example tvOS 14, it won't be supported by any of the apps out there. So all the apps that you actually use on there, anything that isn't Apple made, won't be updated for tvOS 14, and the reason for that is not official firmware yet. So obviously, like I use Infuse, I use iPlay TV, all of these kind of apps that I use, not your big ones, not like Netflix, Apple TV Plus, all these kind of stuff, but all of your apps that you would have purchased off the App Store, most of these generally won't be updated, and for that reason, if they don't work, basically you have no support at all. So if a particular function does not work for you, that's it, you're kind of stuck with it until Apple releases an official update, because the problem is you can't downgrade on the Apple TV. Now, having said all of that, I do want to actually touch on a few of the things that they've actually introduced. So obviously, firstly, they've brought in these little, they've changed the UI slightly, and for me personally, this one was the one that really caught my eyes. With regards to the HomeKit integration, and I actually made a video about this, saying that it's one of the things that Apple need to look at in terms of utilizing the Apple TV more for HomeKit. I don't believe that they actually make the most of what this particular device could do for them, and they've actually introduced one of the features where, say for example, your doorbell rings, it'll actually bring up a little pop-up window in the top right hand corner, and this is their new control center interface, if you like. So this is when you've actually opened up Control Center and then you've actually clicked on the HomeKit section. So obviously, as you can see here, it gives you a few themes, it gives you any cameras that you've got showing, and it'll do other things in there as well, obviously if you've got light bulbs and things like that. Now, the part that I really liked was obviously the cameras integration. So the way it showcased it on the actual event was it only showed the actual doorbells. Whereas if you consider how I have my setup, where I actually have my HomeKit setup in such a way where if certain sensors trigger, it'll perform a certain action. Now, it would be really cool if I could actually integrate, and I don't know whether this is possible yet or not, because obviously I've not been able to have a look at it, and there isn't really any confirmation on this type of setup. But my scenario would be, I have a sensor at the front of my house that triggers whenever anybody walks towards my house. That initially rings the doorbell, so it rings a chime on a Aqara hub that I actually have both upstairs and downstairs. So even if somebody hasn't rang my doorbell, it'll actually ring a chime similar to a doorbell, and it'll also turn on the LED lights in my house. So it'll turn on the TV lights, and that you could just actually hear it in the background. In fact, that's where somebody's actually just walked past the front of my house, and that's actually triggered, and it's meant that it's alerted us. The reason I set this up was basically we have it a lot with couriers and delivery drivers where they don't ring the doorbell, and or they'll literally just quickly knock, and then they'll just leave a note saying you weren't in, and they'll just be on their way. We have this a lot with iPhone deliveries in this country for some stupid reason, where couriers delivering iPhones, because they have that many deliveries on release day. I've had it 2 years in a row where I've had to actually go out and almost chase the delivery driver down, because he's literally posting the card into the letterbox before he's even knocked on the door. So because we have quite a lot, we do a lot of online shopping, and because of that, obviously this is something where we needed something set up where we could actually remedy this. Now at the moment, my cameras aren't actually integrated into HomeKit. So I have a Reolink camera, and I have a another just generic brand. Both of them show up through the Reolink app. I managed to get them both working in the DS Cam app on my phone. However, they don't actually show up through HomeKit. Now what I would be interested in is whether I could set up a scenario where if that motion sensor is triggered, rather than just bringing up just turning on the lights and playing the chime, it just brings up a little pop-up in the top right hand corner showing the actual front camera. That would be really useful for me, and that's something that, being completely honest, I don't think Apple will integrate that, because even right now being able to create scenes and automations is still very difficult, and you'll normally end up having to go down the route of using Siri shortcuts as opposed to using HomeKit automation. So HomeKit automations, as far as I tested on iOS 13, was still very lacking, and even some core elements of HomeKit automations didn't work correctly. So for example, anybody out there who's used the sunrise or sunset toggles or presets, if you like, they don't actually work. You have to go by actual timings, so you have to set a time and that will trigger an automation. But if you just set it to sunrise or sunset, even with all of your location services, so maps can so weather can pull through the sunrise and sunset, even with everything enabled that you could think of, the sunrise and sunset options did not work. So that side of things, obviously I'm hopeful that they do actually integrate that kind of automation. Obviously we're only on to beta 1 at the moment, and this is officially meant to be a developer beta, not a public beta. Public beta probably won't come for another month, but having said all of that, obviously that's I'm hopeful for. But HomeKit aside, obviously most people on this channel are on it for one of two things: either jailbreaking and iPhones related stuff, or it's TVs. So coming back for you guys, all the guys who tune in for the TV stuff, just coming down, this is the part that will interest you all as well as me. So thankfully, finally, with TvOS 14, we will be able to AirPlay 4K videos. So I'm not sure how many people are actually aware of this, but whenever you AirPlay anything from your phone, even if it's a video that you've recorded in your camera roll, you're only AirPlaying it at 1080p, which is why it generally tends to buffer a little at the start, because it's actually downsampling it to 1080p. Finally, we're going to actually be getting 4K video AirPlay. So if you've recorded some 4K video and you AirPlay it to a 4K Apple TV that is on TvOS 14, it's finally going to be able to actually play that back in 4K. So you will actually be getting full resolution. The next one is audio sharing, and during the event they actually made quite a big detail in terms of almost Atmos sound for the iPhone, and it's a similar thing where they're probably going to be improving functionality of headphones with all of the devices anyway, and in particular obviously the AirPods and AirPods Pro. But obviously this is one of the functions where I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think you could do a similar thing to this anyway, audio sharing, where you could send it to multiple devices, but I'm not sure whether you could actually do it to 2 sets of headphones in the past, which is probably why they've actually listed it here. So now obviously if you're watching a movie and there's just 2 of you at night, you can actually just pipe it straight through to your AirPods, and obviously not have your full audio system blasting out and disturbing people at night, if that's a scenario where it could affect you. And coming on to the last one and the biggest one is finally 4K for YouTube. So basically, for those who aren't aware, the codec differentiation between Apple and Google, it's almost been a codec war where Apple wanted to use pretty much the generic kind of codecs that are out there, whereas Google have always insisted on using, I believe it's VP9. I'm not 100% sure on whether that's the correct codec version or name for it, but I'm sure I read somewhere that it was VP9 that they actually wanted to implement, as opposed to HEVC or H.265, which is what most people on the net will actually refer to 4K codecs, the more efficient 4K codecs. So because of this, obviously down the years, even though Apple's released a 4K Apple TV, you could never actually watch YouTube in 4K. It only ever give you a 4K, sorry, a 1080p option. Now finally we're going to get the option to actually watch it back in 4K, and obviously that is ultimately also going to give you HDR and everything else that comes with it. I'm not 100% sure whether this also gives you multi-channel audio. Some people have claimed that if you use a browser you can actually get 5.1 audio from YouTube. I've personally never actually experienced this or been able to test this, because most of the devices I've got connected to TVs are generally, my PC is quite old, so I've not actually used it in quite a while. Most of the laptops probably won't be able to output multi-channel sound anyway, so that's something that obviously any of you guys out there that have got PCs connected to a TV or sound system, then obviously that's something that you could actually just run a quick test on. But I'm hopeful that alongside the 4K they also bring some sort of multi-channel support. It probably won't make a massive difference, but it's more so for the comparison kind of videos where people make it, where you're trying to give people an idea of how the Atmos or the surround sound actually functions on a particular device, and it's very difficult, apart from volume, to actually differentiate between how things sound. And obviously there's always that fact of if I'm recording something, you're playing it back through a stereo setup, you're never going to get the full effect anyway. But obviously there is a lot that can be done these days manipulating audio, and essentially, I mean, the iPhone is prime example where it only has 2 speakers, and yet you can get some quite well, not realistic, but it's very interesting in terms of how they can actually manage to almost give you an Atmos-like effect with different height channels and different phases in terms of the audio switching. So it's possible, and especially with headphones. Obviously headphones is probably prime example where there's a lot more that can be done with headphones because of the isolation you get, compared to if you were just listening to this, say for example on a phone or a tablet or on a TV with just stereo sound. But obviously this I just wanted to make a quick, not so quick, but just like a little overview of just the TV side of things, because that's one of the ones where I think there's a lot that probably has been done under the shell that most people, most reviewers, most people posting on social media, they're probably not going to pick up on straight away, primarily because a lot of these functions won't actually be fully enabled yet. I installed the iOS 14 beta yesterday, and there are a few things in there that aren't actually fully up and running just yet. So you can see placeholders for certain things, but they've not actually been fully activated because that function just isn't far enough along. So obviously there probably will be more things to come out as the betas continue. I won't be running the TvOS beta on my devices for the simple reason that it's too much. It's too long a gap. Possibly when we get closer towards actual TvOS, obviously normally it's going to be releasing around September-October time, the official version. So possibly when we get closer to the time and we've got some bigger functions that I can actually test with at that point, and obviously once we're closer to the official release, because if you install it then and everything isn't quite right, you've only got to wait maybe a week or two, or possibly up to a month. Whereas if I install it now and nothing's working, I've basically got an Apple TV, even though I have 2 of them, but they are in separate rooms and they serve different purposes. So for that reason I probably won't be installing it until after or close to the actual release date, or possibly I may just monitor it. And with the phone side of things, I'm gonna be doing all the beta updates on the 6S Plus that I'm testing on. But with the TV I'm not so much concerned, mainly because in order to get the functionality, you also need the other device to be running iOS 14 as well. So essentially I would need to be running this particular phone on iOS 14 in order to get that functionality as well, and this is my daily. And as I've said in my sorry, not the jailbreak, how to update to iOS 14 video, I would not recommend you run any type of beta on your your primary devices. If you have a spare phone, by all means go and test it, or if you don't mind resetting your phone, but it's just not a clever thing to do in terms of battery life and everything. The iPhone that I've actually got running iOS 14, I believe one of the stock apps actually caused it to crash this morning. So which one was it? I think it was actually the App Store. So I actually clicked on the App Store, and it basically did a reboot. So as you can see, it's one of those things where it's not going to be stable at this point, and most things are not even fully working yet anyway. So I wouldn't recommend installing beta versions on any of your primary devices. If you have secondary or spare old devices, then by all means have a little play about with it. But to be perfectly honest, we're so early on in the stage of betas at the moment that there's very few functions that are going to be actually working. So for that reason, obviously just watch the videos on YouTube, and if you have any spare devices, by all means test on those. But as I say, let's just wrap this video up. What we'll be doing though is I'll be giving a overview in terms of thoughts as we go along. So any new functions and functionality that does actually pop up, I'll just give my thoughts on those, and also anything that could potentially improve, or hopefully not be a detriment, but hopefully things that do improve our interactions with these particular devices. As always, if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and also if you haven't done so, hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified as soon as I upload a new video.